Welcome into the Husker247 Podcast. I'm Michael Bruntz, Brian Christopherson over there. It's the off season, but the news does not stop. We'll get into the significant Nebraska scheduling news that finally dropped yesterday. We'll talk quarterback commits. Always exciting when those happen. And we'll set the table for the final weekend of Husker baseball in the second segment. But first, Nebraska, Colorado, under the lights, September 6:30 kick,
6:30
on NBC. Brian, what do you make of that? That's a big deal.
People are delighted about it, as they should be. It's going to be one of those crowds that tells the 2014 Miami crowd, why were you so well-mannered? Like, why were you so polite? I think this crowd's going to be like that. I don't know if they're going to be tipping over buses or whatever happened back. Didn't that happen back in 14? Maybe some of that stuff we can not bring to this one, but inside the stadium, that's just going to be electric. That I know it's not the game of the day like in college football. Big Noon supposedly has that one. I think it'll be the game of the day. I think it'll be like if you were just an average fan and you're like, okay, you've had Deion Sanders whatever stuff about Colorado on your timeline or wherever all off season, and this is their first big game on the road. Nebraska wants payback. Their fans do at least. And it's just going to be an electric atmosphere. Yeah, that's going to be a game that will not take a backseat to any that day, no matter where it is.
It has high. I was after the news broke. I mean, we were talking a little bit about it, but I mean, there's been some electric-ish atmospheres for Nebraska Colorado games in the past. I mean, Are we talking 92 Nebraska, Colorado in terms of like just vitriol in the stands? Like, is that what you're expecting? Because I feel like you kind of have to be careful too, because the great thing about that Miami Nebraska game in 2014 was like, I mean, maybe I had my head in the sand, but I wasn't expecting like just the hate, like Miami wasn't great. Like that Miami team was okay, but not great. But I mean, you've got everything that happened out at the Res. You had people brawling at the Starlight. Like it was
they were
just,
brawling at the Starlight. I didn't know about that.
Yeah, no, there was like it was in the middle of the game. There was like you could see on the like Twitter police blotter thing that I was following. It was like they had to send cops to the Starlight because people
Starlight Lounge.
Yeah, everybody should just be in there.
People throwing martinis on people's faces and stuff.
Sipping, whatever flavor of martini they want that they cook up down there, thinking about Sinatra and the Rat Pack, but instead they were just going full Donnybrook in there.
Do they still play like Sinatra? Well, like the game's on mute, but they have Dean Martin playing in the background.
They've got like one little tube TV over in the corner. I haven't been down there in a long time, obviously, so I don't know what the setup is. So
I'm not making fun either. I think it's a cool place. I just didn't know there was a fight there 10 years ago.
You need to have a lot of peppermint martinis, I would think, to get revved up down at the Starlight. But no, I mean that was the thing about that day that surprised me, was just like, wow, the people are really pissed off.
Yeah, I got asked a question on the radio about if it hurt. I think it was if it hurts more for Nebraska fans to lose to Iowa or Colorado. And I said, I actually said Iowa, because I think Iowa is like, it's a conference game and it's like there's that cubicle space you hold with certain people that are Iowa folks. And I said, but Colorado will be the vote, because there's going to be a lot of people who won't want to admit it's Iowa, like in a poll like that, or they won't bring their mind to say that it's Iowa. However, I'm kind of like slapping back at my answer here.
Hey, you're hedging here.
Well, one thing I always remembered, I'll bring Oklahoma into this discussion. In the Pelini years when Nebraska played Oklahoma, It wasn't, of course, like it was like in the late 80s and stuff like that. The teams weren't never. I mean, it never was a situation where they're like 3 versus 5 or anything like that. There were some good teams some of those years. But I remember the year Nebraska won 10-3 against OU, and O'Hanlon had a few picks. He had the one that ended it. Defense played great. Prince had a pick that was huge. But that crowd was so loud, and there was I'm bringing this up because it jolted me to realize like there's something about that uniform to certain people in this state and this stands, that Sooners uniform when it's in Memorial Stadium, that it just brings them to another level. And there is truth to that with Colorado too. There's going to be that, just like, and Miami brought that too. It's like you could go back 30 years in time to a game where they got the better of your program, but it's the same uniform concept, that's out there in front of your eyes. And it just brings out something in a person where they're like, I can't stand those guys, man. And Colorado is always like top 3, like in that conversation. You can rank them however you want. But they're one of those programs where you just see it, you see the helmet, and it brings something out of Husker fans.
And there's been this like, and I don't know how much of it's like legit. Like there's just been this positioning of Nebraska's and Colorado's programs over the last 2 years between the way that Nebraska's approaching things and the way that Colorado's approaching things from a recruiting perspective. I mean, there was all the crap that happened last year pregame that was just like so overblown. Like it really was about, whatever pregame disrespect happened or didn't happen. Like it was a little bit of an eye roll, like a big eye roll. But I mean, that adds to it. And I think that's going to be the narrative going into this one again. Is just like this is the way, this is the way they're doing it over here. This is the way they're doing it over here. It's just like such a dichotomy that people have kind of pushed these two programs into, right or wrong. That kind of adds a little bit of it. It adds a little bit of like it doesn't feel real to me. It's like you're being told like this is what you should think, and this is why these two programs are different. And I think for most Nebraska fans, to your point, it's just like they hate that helmet. Like they've always just like disliked everything about the program and just the way that rivalry played out. So I mean, I'm intrigued to see what it's going to be. I hope you don't kind of get like the big push behind it like you had with Texas and the red out around the world and all that crap. I don't think you need to do that. Like I think there's going to be plenty of hate flowing in the stadium that night anyways.
I think everybody on the outside will do whatever to kind of bring that, but I think on the inside, I don't think there'll be anything within the athletic program that even hints at what like red out around the world or whatever that was against Texas in 2010. It kind of backfired. It was just like that was built up like from the summer till that game. And you could tell Nebraska was just like tight as like 3 coats of paint, playing that game. So yeah, that'll be the test here is like whether Rule staff wants it or not. It's going to be like just completely talked about, and they've got to make sure their team's like locked in on UTEP first, and that's you got to win that one. But yeah, it's the time for a kickoff that it needed to be for this one. Nebraska fans will be intense. They'll walk right up to that cliff and hopefully stay there. You stay right there and don't go too far with what your comments or whatever, but it'll be not a Nebraska nice crowd. And that's okay if it's within a certain confines, if there's enough of a fence around it to just keep you in there. But it won't be a friendly crowd. It wasn't that way, by the way, in basketball when Nebraska played Texas A&M. It's obviously less fans, but that was like an example where I was like, this is not a Nebraska nice crowd in this gym tonight. Like they're booing every A&M guy and stuff. And I don't mind that a little bit. I bet Ed Foley doesn't mind it a little bit coming from Philly and some of those guys. So they can't say that, but they'll probably enjoy this crowd and be like, oh, this is different how they get after it for these guys.
Yeah. I mean, you don't need to chuck. You don't need to put batteries and snowballs and chuck those. I
No.
mean, you can get right up to that point, though. I think that's okay.
Oh, well, right up to that point. I don't know
You-
what that point is.
Batteries are a bridge too far.
Yeah.
But I was just you mentioned Ed Foley too, and people in Philadelphia are also prone to chucking batteries too. So
Do
kindred
you have
spirit.
favorite, since we're on Nebraska, Colorado? See, I think Nebraska, Colorado also is a series where when you go through it, the games are usually fascinating. Like they've had some just sort of bizarre games. You can go back and talk about the snowball game where Colorado fans are heaving snowballs with Byron Bennett trying to kick a field goal, ends up a tie. Obviously, the Halloween game, but then there's all those games, Bruntz, like out in Boulder, 2 or 3 games where Nebraska led by like 24 with great teams. One of them was a
Yeah,
national championship team, and almost slipped and hit their face on the curb, and won a couple of those games by the skin of their teeth. Do you have like a favorite or one that's like not talked about as much? Because obviously, the '92 one always gets chatted about, but there's others.
yeah. Does the 2005 game get remembered if you didn't have the Restore the Order T-shirts? Like that game, like just what happened in it. Like I think sometimes gets lost a little bit, but between the fact that like you had the like crappy sloganeering, and then you had the entire student section get ejected from the game. Like those two things stand out in that game. But Nebraska really took it to Colorado that year, and Nebraska's a pretty hefty underdog, as I remember, right?
I think they were like a 2-touchdown underdog, something like that. There wasn't a lot of faith in Nebraska going into
No,
that game.
and that one stands out. The I don't know, like even when Nebraska had like you said, like you kind of had you went into it thinking like Nebraska was far and away the better team. They kind of just let Colorado hang around in some of those games. Like even what was it, the 2009 game where Nebraska won, but it never really felt that comfortable.
Mm.
Colorado hits the late Hail Mary for the one of the greatest backdoor covers in Nebraska history. Depending on which side you were betting, I guess. But yeah, it always felt like a lot of the weird games were there, like in Boulder.
Weird games and weird like sometimes post game scenes. Like I wasn't there in '03 because I had a job in Florida for 1 year in between school and my stuff at the Lincoln newspaper. But that was weird because that was the last Solich game,
Hmm.
'03, and Nebraska actually wins the game in Boulder, and yet you've got officials. I've heard this from enough people who are on the sideline, Nebraska high up officials who like have a look of like no happiness at all because they know this complicates the matter. Um, then you've got '07 was strange. It was a 65-51 like PlayStation game. Joe Gans was sort of winning hearts, but they were just, everything else about Nebraska was a train wreck. Everybody knew Bill Callahan was going to get fired, and that one I was at, and the post game was like in a hallway, like at that time, just like a very skinny hallway. And there was
Hmm.
like 30 to 35 people crammed to hear a coach give his last words as the as the head man, basically. So there's also these kind of weird things. '05 is a good one to bring up. Obviously, you have the Alex Henry game, which I went back and watched recently, and people forget how it got to that point. Nebraska was a far better team, but they like had a play. They ran that trick field goal, like where they flipped it over the holder, flipped it over his head that the LSU used to run,
Yeah.
and Colorado ran it back for a touchdown. And so it like was a 10 to 14 point swing, kind of kept Colorado in it. Then Gans like takes a sack just before the Henry kick, which almost forces him out of field goal
Yeah.
range.
Yeah.
Um,
It was
all
like a
sorts of
comedy of errors that like very neatly wrapped itself up.
Yeah, a comedy of errors that all led us to like that moment, like we had to have those things happen
Yeah.
so that we could have that memory. Um, but then some of the games, um, that are forgotten even. Like 96, Nebraska beat Colorado 17-12, like in a rain. It was almost like a freezing rain.
Mm-hmm.
And Colorado was ranked top 5. Like Rick Neuheisel was kind of cherry picking off of McCartney's old guys and still had a good team. And Nebraska had worked their way back after the loss to Arizona State early in the year, and that was like an interesting game. And saw that recently. I was like, man, that was 4 versus 5. Like, you forget like some of those games, like the stakes, and that Colorado was that highly rated and all that stuff. But
yeah, it's interesting going into this one, like this year though too. I mean, just the way that things have kind of played out, I guess, the last 3 matchups with Colorado. Like you've got the game where Adrian goes off. Colorado pulls that one out. The just epic collapse in Boulder the following year, where even after Maurice Washington hits that long touchdown, you think like, okay, they might actually find a way to hold on here. And Nebraska was ranked in that game, number 24. And then last year, where the score doesn't really show it, but I mean, you basically just choke away so many points on turnovers and just miscues that I don't know. I guess it's not easy. It's not difficult for me to say that there's probably a little bit of a feel of desperation probably in the minds of some Nebraska fans, just given the way that this series has gone in the last 3. Like it's. And I don't know that you would say that Colorado's been like a better team than Nebraska really in any of these. I mean, it just a lot of self-inflicted stuff from Nebraska's point of view.
Yeah. The 2018 game, I almost was forgetting about it until you brought it up, where Adrian played well as a true freshman, got hurt in it. And you hate to bring up old stuff, but it was like, remember Colorado was up like 14-0, and Nebraska had like a 8 to 10 minute stint there where they quickly tied it up, and the defense was getting all these sacks, and Frost offense was playing sort of like in that. It was like, okay, that's what it looked like at USCF. They're playing like with pace and stuff, and they quickly even the score. And I don't mean this to be snarky. It's actually true to me. That was like almost the best 10 minutes of the Frost era. Like, it was like where it felt like, oh yeah, you got exactly what you thought, like how they at that moment when it was 14-14, I was like, oh yeah, look at what they got. Like, this is going to be fun watching this roll around. And wasn't right.
The thing that stood out in that game was like the defense. Like that was like by far the best game they played that season, aside, well, maybe Michigan State late, but I mean they were it was like the chaos that you were hoping that you were going to get from what UCF had showed the previous year.
Yeah. They got a lot of sacks. They gave up some stuff. Laviska Shenault, really good. I remember that. But
Steven
yeah,
Montez.
Yeah. The game last year in Boulder, the thing I walked away from that one was it was probably a pretty even game, or like even between what the two programs were at the time going into that. And I felt like Nebraska did not represent themselves well, like in the way of like, it was just like, here you go. It's like, here's a gift over here, And I mean, that's a game that at halftime should have been like basically 0-0 still. And you're just laying it on the rug and giving them the ball on the 20-yard line, and then you're kind of chasing uphill the rest of the way. And I'm sure the defense, though, like they weren't going to say this out loud, but there's going to be memories from that game in the second half that are still sticking their craw, when Colorado got rolling a little bit and the stadium was juiced up. And that was one of the rare times really in this season where a game got away from the defense, even though some of it wasn't their fault. By the end of it, they were struggling, like to keep up a bit. And so it's going to be a big challenge, and Nebraska is going to have cornerbacks who are ready. We don't know how that's going to shake out, through the camp. They're going to be tested against a good quarterback. So yeah, this thing has everything. And I think the history of the game to fans is just, besides just the Deion Sanders stuff, you're right. Like, it's the helmet. It's just like one of those helmets that Nebraska fans see it and it's like, let's go. They wake up like just, 10 Red Bulls in already, like in their veins without even, taking a sip of anything. They're just ready for it. So it'll be intense.
Should be I would expect that to be a pretty massive recruiting weekend for Nebraska as well. Given the night game, given the opponent, given the juice in the stadium.
I remember John Mills, who a Husker target lineman. He's a really kind of I don't know. He's a joyful sort of guy, and I've enjoyed talking to him. And he was just like shooting the breeze about it. And I don't know that he can make it, but he's like, man, I would love to get to that game. He was just talking as like a college football fan.
Right.
Like, it wasn't even like anything to do with his recruitment specifically with Nebraska. He just like knew that was going to be off the charts. And so, yeah, it'll be monster for recruits.
The last weekend was also a big visit weekend, big recruiting weekend for Nebraska. They got their quarterback, Brian. They got a commitment from TJ Lateef, California quarterback, 2025. This one felt like it had been coming for a while. He was kind of messing around with maybe taking a few more visits, but those didn't materialize, and Nebraska has a 4-star quarterback in their class. What did you make of the commitment in terms of what it means for Nebraska's quarterback room? Because I think the conversation in some circles has been, when you sign somebody like Dylan Raiola in one class, what does that kind of do for subsequent classes? And certainly Daniel Kalen too. I mean, you take 2 quarterbacks in 2024, but they got a pretty good one who plays some pretty high-level competition in California.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes to show you got to just keep stacking talent in the room and let them compete. You can never be afraid of that idea of like, oh, what if we bring in this guy? How's that going to do? What's that going to do to everything? You only have right now 3 scholarship quarterbacks too. So if you're Lateef looking in at it, yes, Dylan Raiola is a great talent with all that potential. But from a numbers standpoint, he's entering a room that needs him. Like they need him to be a guy that gives them an option and is within a year or so or pretty soon on the scene, ready to compete and push Dylan or whomever it may be. So I like that his mindset is such that he believes in his talents. He believes that the program he's picked has these sort of resources and coaches that he thinks are going to elevate his talents. And then you just see where it lands. You go out there and roll the ball out. Let's see who's got what. That was sort of one of the quotes he gave. He's just excited to see where it ends up, if it's really a competition. And those are the type of guys you're looking for. So I think it's great. They had to get a QB in this class. You couldn't have just shot an air ball. So if you're going to get a quarterback, I mean, don't, just, go get a guy who's got the goods that you really want. And this was their number one target. And they had some other targets that were interesting on the board, but I think this was the guy who was always at the top.
It's kind of the first big win too for Glenn Thomas. Mm-hmm. Like what is that? Because they focused in on him pretty quickly after Glenn Thomas got to Nebraska. What do you kind of make of that in terms of maybe what Nebraska's quarterback recruiting can be going forward? Because this isn't a staff really that's recruited or that's had a ton of success or pulled a lot of guys out of California yet.
Yeah. Big win for Glenn Thomas, Satterfield. Thomas, I think if guys, and I'm sure they put this in front of him, if they study his background with developing quarterbacks, he's had a lot of success, especially with guys who are freshmen and, kind of getting them a strong jump from the blocks. And so that probably had appeal. I would guess too, I don't know this for sure, but like the quarterback room itself, I bet had appeal. Like, even though like we're talking about it, like, oh, there's Ryle over here. What do you do about that? Like if you're TJ Lateef, well, you get to know the guys on your visit and you maybe kind of like them, and you think like, these are the type of guys I know I'm competing against them, but I also know it's like a brotherhood, when you get inside a room like that, and they're people I want to like, and Ryle, Danny Kalen, Harburg come across as guys who are pretty accepting of competition, and I think probably made a good impression on a guy who's looking at the school. So I'm impressed by him that he didn't worry about some of the stuff we talk about on the outside or think about or some of these storylines, and just said, I feel like this was the best program for me with the coaches who suit my game. I believe in my game. Let's go do it. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, he's not concerned about what the general public has to say about things.
There
That's
you
always a
go.
good sign. He's also, it's just in terms of just strengths and stylistically, he's a little bit of a different quarterback than what Nebraska has on their roster now. He can make all the throws, completed 64% of his passes as a sophomore. He knocked that number up higher as a junior. I know our analyst in California, Greg Biggins, was pretty impressed by how he showed at the Elite 11 regional this spring. But he's also a little bit more of a dual threat option, I think, than what Nebraska has in its two freshman quarterbacks right now. He doesn't have like gaudy run numbers, but you can run zone read with them pretty comfortably. And, he's got the accuracy to go with it. And, the numbers dipped a little bit, in terms of yardage and touchdowns as a junior, but he was playing through some injuries. So, the other thing you have to remember, he's playing really, really high level competition in Southern California. It's almost a little bit like, you don't want to say it's like college light, but I mean the level of player that he's playing against at Orange Lutheran, you don't see many places in the country. So kind of having to be through that pressure to perform in that setting, I think really benefits a guy. And I think that also kind of plays in a little bit to, looking at the depth chart at Nebraska and saying like, okay, like let's do it. I've done this. I've played against high level guys before. So I think it fits a lot of kind of what Nebraska's looking for. And I agree. I mean, I think, as much as Nebraska views itself as a developmental program, they're bringing in guys at that quarterback spot that they can really develop. And I think they have a lot of confidence that Thomas can get those young guys playing well early on. So that was a big win. I mean, I think it also helps you too when you would get your quarterback in your recruiting class. It really helps with the peer recruiting aspect. They're kind of naturally a guy that you can coalesce around as other recruits. So I think that was a big win.
Yeah, those guys will bond around him. Those guys did it with Daniel Kalen too, and you can still tell like players who are like here this spring, the connection they had with Kalen that formed back to when he was, a commit. One last thought, Bruntz, is like we always do this with positions where people like to lay it out on paper, like, oh, this guy's going to be this guy for 2 to 3 years, and this guy for 1 to 2, and you can be realistic. I don't think it's cryptic to talk about this. It's just realistic from the past tells us this. It rarely works out that way. Like something happens, a guy gets hurt, someone will leave, it just is part of college football. And I think the guys who are recruits who are really savvy kind of can get their mind around that. Like, okay, just because it's this particular picture and some people write it out on paper like it's going to go out like this, it never goes how we write it out on paper for like the 5-year plan at a position. So I like guys that can kind of see past that. And go back to the Rule comment. He said that they want to shoot for the top over there. And if you want to shoot for the top, you're going to play 14 to 16 games a year eventually if you get to that. And more than likely, just the way football is, you're going to need a room of 2 to 3 QBs who you really believe in to get you there, like over the course of it. Once in a while, you won't need that. But, I mean, we've all seen how depth gets tested, especially at that position. So you got to have guys like him in your program. Your second, third guy have to be really good.
Well, when you're talking 4- and 5-star guys at that quarterback spot, I mean, it's basically a coin flip about whether or not a guy is going to finish his career at the place where he signs.
Yeah.
Like it's almost kind of an expectation that, you get a room of 3 or 4, you're probably going to realistically have 2 left by the end of a couple of years, just because that's how things work and there's only one football. So
Yep.
good to continue to build depth there with TJ Lateef's commitment. Anything else recruiting wise? Big visit weekend, obviously. 5-star offensive lineman David Sanders was in town. Broderick Scholl, Oklahoma offensive tackle Nicholas Clayton, Florida edge rusher, and Caleb Benning getting that official visit in right before the buzzer, before he enrolls at Nebraska in 2 weeks. Like he's basically
June
moving
1st.
in 2 weeks.
Yeah, June 1st. I think Benning was a great guy to have there, though, because he has the gift of conversation just like his dad does, and I think he's a good ambassador for someone who's already in. This is why I chose the program. Here's the pluses, and you don't have to. You obviously can't take a guy by the hand and say, "Come be part of this program," but you can say what stuck out to you and why. And I think it means a lot when the peer recruiting is able to do that. Obviously David Sanders is the big fish out there. I mean, just the fact that they got him here is interesting because he had a top 6 in early March that did not include Nebraska. But you keep working on it. I think he had a connection a little bit with Raiola from their past recruiting that maybe is useful there. And I think if nothing else, however that one goes, it tells you that guys like that are kind of peering over the fence a little bit, Bruntz, to at least say, okay, I want to at least see what this is about. I've heard about this facility. It feels like there's a lot of buzz about this program and how they're going to build it. I do see they have the QB now, and I might as well go look at it. And once you get them here, you never know. You heard Sean Patton, Dr. Susan Elza talk this last week. Now the facility is all kind of polished up a little bit more. They don't have to wear the hard hats anymore. They have the walkthrough room, all that stuff. The weight room, just you can walk right out on the field, and it's pretty cool. And I just think there's a feeling like you put them there, and then you give them the tour, and you let Nicholas Clayton was talking to me about taking the learning nutrition stuff from Kristen Coggan over there. And they did the cooking thing, and they teach them how to make something even. And I just think they have a presentation that is pretty appealing to recruits beyond just the facility cliche quote we always get. There's more stuff. It's okay, here's the facility, but here's the people who also operate behind that and why it's going to be useful to you and how it can be useful. And when you can get them here and actually share that, it's pretty impactful.
Yeah, well, and I Sanders had the whole family there. The grandparents were with him. That I think as that recruitment kind of plays out, there's obviously a number of official visits set up in June. A lot of those are return trips to places he's already been: Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, Ohio State, Clemson, and for Nebraska, I mean, you basically. If somebody's willing to really put in the time, I think, and really look at and fine tooth comb everything, I think Nebraska can stack up pretty well in that regard. As long as they're able to get guys to campus, you take your big swing, and you've done what you're going to do. And I think when you start getting guys like that on campus, though, I mean they highly rated recruits talk about other highly rated recruits, that it kind of feeds out there a little bit. And, I think just kind of having that experience of getting into Lincoln helps in the long term. And, we say it every year, it feels like, but if they can just kind of finally put it together on the field, I mean, I think Nebraska's poised to be competitive for a little bit of a higher caliber of recruit. And certainly having Dylan Raiola being a willing peer recruiter, I think is really big too.
And everybody here has heard Rule on the mic. And while he has said you're 5-7 until you're not, I think he does have a way about him in where he's probably effective in making people believe this is going places. Like, you can get on or not, but it's going to go somewhere. And I think what's useful to him right now, and I'm not just trying to be a sunshine pumper. I actually think this with the players. I think there's a lot of players in the program who think that right now. I do. I think they actually believe that the next couple of years are going to be a change in Husker football, and it's going to be different. People have heard that for a long time, so I don't mind them rolling their eyes at that, but I think that is the feeling within those walls over there. And so if you can communicate that and a recruit walks away thinking, these guys were 5-7 or 4-8 the last few years, but man, they sure don't seem like they like that, like the way they are going about it right now. I think that's useful too. And I think that kind of gets across to some of those guys.
All right. Take a quick break. We'll come back, chit chat a little bit on baseball and get out of here. But we'll be back to talk Nebraska's final weekend series of the regular season and play the scenario game. So we'll have that in just a second. All right, Brian, you got your you got your pad and pen ready.
Got a pen.
Nebraska baseball heads to Michigan State for a Thursday, Friday, Saturday series, the final series of the regular season. And the Big Ten schedule makers have, against all odds, put together a potentially a hell of a finish here for where things stand in the Big Ten standings. You've got Illinois out in front right now by one game as we get into the final weekend. Illinois, followed by Nebraska, one game behind. Purdue and Indiana and Michigan, one game behind Nebraska, so 2 games out of first place. And Iowa, who is out of they're playing Florida International in Des Moines this weekend, as they unfortunately have their non-conference in-season series in the last weekend, so they're locked in at 14-10. But you have all those teams jumbled up together. Illinois plays Purdue, Indiana plays Michigan, Nebraska has Michigan State, who is playing for down towards the 8th seed for the Big Ten tournament. Lots to go here. What's your level of confidence from the outside that Nebraska gets this done?
From the general public point of view,
yeah, give me the general public view.
Yeah, I would say there's probably, if speaking for the general public here, which is dangerous to do, there's belief they can win the series, of course.
Sure.
Should. I think it kind of stops there right now because there's always, I feel like right now, Husker fans feel like it's a team that they'll kind of get going and then, that. So like, I think people like are kind of like maybe 2-1. The sweep is maybe hard for them to picture with all that's at stake. And obviously you then need a little help. But if you sweep, there's a good chance you end up winning it, because one of those games, Illinois probably drops, you'd think. So, but you just gotta go get that first one with your big dog. Start with some momentum there. The bullpen had to feel better about how they like finished the weekend, right? After it was just like a train wreck and everybody's taking their arrows out and aiming it at them. For fair reason. They got it
in a row. 2 games in a row.
Yeah, they got it together though, and so you got to just use that and hope that's momentum, right? So what do you think? You're on the inside. You know a lot more than I do.
So tiebreaker scenarios. This is how the Big Ten breaks their ties. It's head-to-head. That's the first one. Is head-to-head matchups. Nebraska has not played Purdue or Illinois this year, so then you go to records against common opponents. And right now, Nebraska has the tiebreaker advantage with Illinois in record against common opponents. By my back of the cocktail napkin math here, I believe the Purdue tiebreaker against common opponents is still TBD because Michigan State would be a common opponent between the two. And then if that is all equal, then you move on to RPI, which Nebraska stands really well in RPI, in reference or in comparison to the other schools. So Nebraska's in a good spot if you start getting down the line in tiebreaker. If for some reason you get past that of common opponents, past RPI, you know how they decided, Brian?
By Nebraska basketball having beat Purdue and Zach Edey earlier in the year. Isn't that the tiebreaker?
Yes,
No.
they basically it's a coin flip. It
Oh,
literally is
okay.
a coin flip.
It's like
I
Friday
don't
Night
know if
Lights.
I don't know if they go to a truck stop somewhere in eastern Iowa to flip the coin, but it's a coin flip. And if it's this is all the rules. Apparently, if it's multiple teams that are in the tiebreaker, they don't flip a coin, but they draw. They have a drawing.
Wow. Coin flip. that was when I read Friday Night Lights like 20 years ago, and Gary Gaines was the coach of Permian, and he goes and meets at a gas station like an hour away, and the Buzz Bissinger's writing about him like winding down the road, like his job's like at stake, basically, if they win the coin flip. And they all three flipped at the same time, which I wish they would do in this case. And one of the guys tried to cheat, but then like honesty got the better of him, I think, on that Friday Night Lights situation. It's like, mine's tails, I get, or someone else called him on it.
Yeah.
But it's too bad there's not 3 coins at once, and that all the coaches don't have to drive to like Dubuque or something.
Yeah, we're meeting in Bettendorf.
Yeah.
So that's what's ahead. But yes, Nebraska, the bullpen exploded, imploded, ploded.
Imploded.
They ploded against South Dakota State. And the first night against Indiana, they gave up 16 runs in the 8th and 9th inning combined between those two games. Not great. And then you come back on Saturday, you get the 3-run walk-off home run by Cole Evans. Everybody's juiced up. And you get kind of an improbable pitching performance from Caleb Clark on Saturday in relief. Mm-hmm. You come back on Sunday, and Jackson Brockett gives you a great start. Drew Christo comes in with 4 innings of relief, and that's all she wrote. So where do things stand now? I like the fact that they have guys that can pitch multiple innings out of the bullpen, because I think the thing that's been difficult for Nebraska, especially of late, and I think we've talked about this on the midweek stuff, where the more buckets you have to pass that ball to,
eventually it falls off.
The more chances you just invite somebody messing it up. And I think that's kind of what they all year have been trying to find somebody to be a midweek starter or a multi-inning weekend relief option. And it's not a small storyline that Christo and Clark and Brockett have really put it together the last couple of weeks here, at least giving you options as you get into a really key weekend, and then you go to Omaha for the Big Ten tournament, where every arm is any arm that can help you is at a premium. So that at least is at least now is trending okay.
I thought Christo looked really good Sunday. And Brockett is so. I mean, is there an argument to be made that he's like if this is going to really work out down the stretch, he's sort of been that game changer you needed, like you found a guy who, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, he throws a no-hitter. Not bad.
Yeah, that was pretty good.
That's pretty good. And but no, I mean he's he didn't even travel to Rutgers. I mean, he wasn't even on the trip. And to his credit, tinkered with a few things, is throwing more curveballs than he's throwing sliders. That's helped him. And I think in some ways, I mean, he's a junior. You kind of start wondering what your place is on the team going forward. And he's kind of I think a guy that just has, really bared down and competed and kind of earned that spot back. So I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. We'll see if he can keep it rolling. But I mean, even, he started against South Dakota State through about 40 pitches and looked pretty darn good then too. And I think all things being equal, they would have let him pitch longer in that game, but they needed him to start Sunday.
Well, things are feeling better. They were not feeling good at all Friday. Like people were, man,
No,
that was bad.
no.
That the walk-off though, the way they won Saturday, that could have been big too. Like, I mean, it'd be cool to like, yeah, go out and win 10-3 or whatever. But sometimes it's like a game like that, where you've had some bad things happen, and in that moment someone steps up and it gets that big knock, and it just like kind of changes the direction of things. So maybe that was it.
Yeah, no, they needed that badly, and they needed that series win badly, not just for standings, but just kind of, they were going the wrong way in the RPI in a hurry.
Where are they right now?
They're, I think, 30-31, somewhere in there the last I checked.
So they're hanging on.
Yeah. But if you start getting low 30s, you get into the 40s, you can start getting into snub territory real fast. And, that kind of turning that momentum was really important. We'll see if they can kind of keep that rolling this weekend and into Omaha. And, I mean, all you could ask for at the start of the year, this is a team that was picked 5th, was an opportunity to go out and win the conference. They'll need a little bit of help, but the table's somewhat set for them to take advantage of that.
I'm going to give away something as a final question that shows I'm not in the know, which people already realize that with baseball. But is Nebraska the only team in the league that could get an at-large? Or do you see, is the Big Ten can they get a couple in other ways? Like, if Nebraska didn't win the conference tournament, they could maybe get in, but is there anybody else who could do that?
Let me look. I knew you were going to ask that, and I should have been prepared here.
I mean, it's one of those, like, you're not covering them, so whatever. But it's not that important. I was wondering like what Illinois, like where they stood and stuff like that. But
so right now Illinois RPI wise is 58.
Okay.
Maryland actually is 35th, but they're 10-11 in the conference, 34-19 overall. I mean, somebody's probably going to need to make a run in Omaha to really kind of spruce that up to get in the mix.
Do you feel like Nebraska has to kind of? Do you feel like Nebraska has to kind of be in like the championship round or no?
I don't think so, but I mean, you can't go 2 and out. Like I think that really complicates this. Like you probably want to be playing on the weekend still, if you can do that to kind of spruce that up. Because right now Nebraska's sitting at 32-18 overall, 14-7. I mean, that they on paper look good, but you don't want to go into that decision-making process just stinking of a late season flop.
Well,
so that's the weekend. So we'll see if Nebraska baseball can get it done. Anything else that we have not hit on, Brian?
Not that we can't cover in some other podcast in May or June, probably.
Well, and we've got UTEP kick times probably coming up soon. We're getting into that point of the summer where it's like, okay, have we talked about alternate uniforms yet? Is it time for that? There's lots of off-season things to cover here.
We need to make it up, because I know over in the program they're like, yeah, all you guys are going to talk about Colorado, this and that, or trying to focus on YouTube. We'll have to make it up and have a podcast where we go for like 45 minutes just on the minors.
Just new coach. It's a mystery. Don't know what you're going to get down there.
Scotty Walden, right?
Yeah. You don't know what the boys are going to be bringing from El Paso.
Scotty Walden.
Some paste pecani sauce.
I believe he won a American Idol contest, as you said, in like 2013 or something.
That sounds accurate.
Yeah.
All right. We'll be back next week with some more Husker 247 podcast stuff, and get to Husker 247. Still got recruiting stuff rolling in. State track meets coming up this week. We'll have full coverage of Nebraska baseball and their their run to the postseason and kind of how that plays out. Nebraska basketball still with a scholarship or two to potentially fill.
Let's talk about it next week. Keep an eye on it.
There's some things are happening.
I think we just got to keep an eye on it.
All right. So we'll keep an eye on that at Husker 24/7. Get there for all of the latest Nebraska news, notes, and analysis.